Hi, it's Tammy. Today I thought I would kind of deviate a little bit from my usual, and I wanted to talk about something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is addiction. It came to mind after I was working in an Amish home yesterday, and that's something that I do several days a week. I go up into the counties up in Pennsylvania and work with Amish people in their homes. Sometimes just individuals, sometimes the entire family. In this case, it was an entire family. Well, I say entire, there's just three people. Generally, they have lots of people. And I mean, seriously, I have some families that have 12 children that come from 12 children. So they have, they're an incredible people. But I was invited to come work within the community, and I'm very, very excited to be doing so. In this particular case, this family, like I said, only has one child. They were unable to have any more children. But this is a very sweet family, and they've been dealing with some significant issues. And I was in awe of how open and honest they were with me regarding their history, to the degree that I actually felt incredibly honored. I won't lie about that. That said, what was shared with me is that the father figure has been living with PKU since he was born. That's a difficulty metabolizing phenylalanine. And throughout his young adult life, he actually had addictions. That's the reason why this family made me think of this. In the process of doing so, it's interesting to me to see as a society, and I don't mean as an Amish society, I'm talking about primarily as a human society, the idea of addiction and the idea that health conditions are separate has been something that's evolved with us and grown with us and become part of our mindset. And what I'm attempting to do with this work and through these videos and through speaking out is connecting the dots, bridging the gap, if you will, and recognizing that everything is linked. It's intriguing to me to see that, and I've actually mentioned this in other videos, that with one person having, could have 5, 6 different health conditions, and that's not a lie. I've seen several people come to me and had different diagnoses, and they ended up all being related because of the genetics, the way the body is wired. And I'm not surprised to learn that this one particular man actually had an addiction as he was getting older. But what's even more interesting to me is how the family dealt with it, and more importantly, how they dealt with it internally before they started dealing with it externally. I have to say, my hat is off to that family, because without therapists, and this is, I believe wholeheartedly in getting help, they've done it, and they've managed to come clean on their communication and really work through things and come to an understanding as far as they were concerned. But what I had to do yesterday was actually relate the wife's current health conditions and the stress that she's been under, and trying to understand and love her husband, because divorce is not an option, as she said yesterday. This is something that they will not enter into. So, number one, getting past the tiptoeing around and having the son become the father figure, which we'll get into here in a moment. Just the stress that she did alone, that she incurred alone from trying to manage her husband, has caused her some health issues as well. So what I did for her was explain, number one, how PKU works within the brain and how addiction actually works within the brain. And it relates very similar to what happens when people are exposed to chronic trauma. and stress. The brain ends up rewiring itself for the sake of survival. This was actually explained to me years ago through a pediatrician when I was in the process of adopting a couple of girls, and they were both diagnosed, besides reactive attachment disorder, they also were diagnosed with a couple of other things in addition to PTSD. And when I was uncertain as to what preempted this and what this really meant, this is what he explained to me. And he actually equaled it to our troops when they go into battle and the things that they are exposed to, and which makes a lot of sense. And then subsequently, through my studies of, being in school and studying psychology and addiction primarily, it all began to fall into place. And some of the things that, have come through all of that study and education was the fact that addiction actually does alter the brain structure. We know this through, this is actually the definition of addiction, because when we begin to see the difference in the brain structure, then we actually can tell. And there are certain substances that actually do this. Caffeine would be one of them. Sugar is another one. Cigarettes is another. I mean, we can just go in and on about that. But what I was trying to do for this family was explain that he already was born into this world having a hard time producing his own dopamine. So addiction actually made sense because it was triggering the dopamine that he needed in order to maintain a level of normalcy, feeling normal. This is not in support of addiction. This is an explanation for addiction. This is a request that we end the stigma with addiction and other mental health issues, because there are changes in the brain structure, and that is nobody's fault. Is it through the use of substances? Possibly. Were they born that way? Good chance they were. And as in the case of Daniel, we know when we look at brain imaging of autism and schizophrenia and ADHD, when they look at the imaging and they compare it, of the diagnoses, and then they compare it to what they call a normal brain, we begin to see different areas of activity. Well, that tells me that the brain is just wired differently, and that's the reason why there's a different level of activity in that area as opposed to in this brain over here. Does that make it bad or wrong? No, it just means that it's different. Just like there's differences between male and female brains, as we know there's differences between a homosexual brain and a heterosexual brain, as well as even transgender. The brain structures are different. If you don't believe me, go do your research. It's out there. So with that said, it's really important for us to begin to understand what is occurring in the individual, so that we as family members can begin to find a place of understanding and compassion. This doesn't mean you want to enable it, but you want to at least find ways, find outside help. Here we come back to therapy. You don't have to do it like the Amish do. They're so private that they won't talk about these things with other people. That's their culture. We have to, number one, understand people's cultures. Some people don't want to go and talk about very private things. Other people do well to talk about it. So being able to recognize what that individual needs and being able to bring it to the table in order to help them. The Amish culture, like I said, is very private. The fact that this information was shared with me yesterday, I can't tell you how privileged I felt and how honored, and I felt blessed to be able to sit there and extend a helping hand, knowing that this woman trusted me to be safe enough with her information. So I mentioned earlier that the son had become, kind of the male figure. He is what's considered parentified, and so she actually expressed concern because he's almost 21 years of age, and has told her that he doesn't ever see himself dating at this point, and even thinking about getting married, because it wouldn't be right to bring a wife into all of this. because he's running the business. They actually have their own business. Where the father started the business, the son actually had to take over. So you can only imagine what occurred within the father for his young adult son to take over. Now the dad works for the father. So when we talk about addiction, and she was talking about the PKU, we've also, there's clear evidence of high anxiety, low self-esteem. And now he even talks about lack of joy. The only joy he finds is in eating his sweets. And that is clearly an indication that he's really trying to generate dopamine. So I ended up giving them a lot of information as far as what they could do nutritionally in the way of dietary, a couple of supplements, not a lot, and then as well as oils. And I'm also going to be making them some teas. I do herbal teas that provide nutrients as well as the symptom relief, while the oils are doing their thing, which is helping to normalize function. This isn't a statement that essential oils fix. They just simply modify the way the genes are working in order for the genes to get the right nutrients, which then in such quells the symptoms. A couple of genes that work closely with brain structure are the FOXP2 and the BDNF. These are called transcription factors. They're transcription factors because they actually regulate the neurochemistry. And if there's a deviation from their normal function, then the brain chemistry is altered. And we do know that stress can do this. The FOXP2 gene has been identified as being a target, a natural selection. It's being naturally selected to turn itself off for some reason. It's one that's initially linked to speech and language, but they're finding out that, like I said, it regulates neurochemistry, which that neurochemistry is needed to help with brain development. This doesn't surprise me with the increase in autism that we're seeing and other mental health issues like schizophrenia. And addiction. Now, I use mental health as a very light term because I don't see it as a health issue. I see it is an issue, but I don't see it as a disability. That's how I want to say that. And what concerns me even more is that there are now Amish people. I mentioned this one family, and they're not immune to anything. They're not immune to anything. They live in the middle of the English world. That's the word they use for us. They live in the middle of the English world. They're exposed to everything that we're exposed to. Granted, they don't get on computers, or most of them don't get on computers. Infrequently use phones. There's just certain things about their way of living that is based on their belief system. But that doesn't mean that they're not exposed to our world, because they interact with us. They go to our restaurants, they go to our grocery stores, they see our physicians. So they're in their buggies. Some of them hire drivers, so they are exposed to the English world every single day. And now I found out just a couple weeks ago that some of the young Amish men are young Amish people, not just men, are being introduced to none other than our prescription painkillers. This is sad, and the reason why it's sad especially is because besides what addiction does to the individual involved with it, the exposure of the family to addiction, and it goes back into this particular family. While dad had his addictions going on, and mom started turning to the son as a confidant, as somebody to talk to because she lost her husband, and this young man became parentified. He became the hero. He's taken on a lot of roles, and as I explained to her, and she says to me, she feels really badly. It was never her intention to do this to him, because she essentially enabled her husband in order to keep the peace. But in the long haul of it was that their son ended up taking on roles that he didn't need to. And now she feels badly for it. And I explained to her that it's really important to get them some help as a structure, as a family, because long term, the resentment that could build in their son would be pretty devastating. It could cost them their family. And I say this because I myself, it cost me my family, my parents in particular. I've seen it happen in other families too. It's interesting, my parents have their own addictions. I was raised in that type of household. It was primarily an alcoholic household. I developed my own as a means, I don't know how you want to describe it, coping. I believe there was a physiological issue there, like I said, genetic, not necessarily that it was passed on, other than the fact that I really believe that my brain chemistry was low in dopamine, actually, because my drugs of choice all inspired and triggered dopamine production. And that's part of the reason why I went in and studied it. It was part of my healing process. It was part of my ability to be able to help other people and to begin to express the importance that the family find ways to get help. Because what can happen to these people when they come out of their addiction and begin to recover is painful, if not deadly. It took me a long time because, like I said, I grew up in that type of household. I developed my own. I recovered from my own, and I've been recovered for years, but my family still has nothing to do with me because they have their opinions as to why I did what I did, because it was different. It was more than just alcohol. They had their own opinions about that, and I've just come to the place that it actually helped me to find the muscle to have compassion and understanding. And I can sit here in front of you and in front of anybody and express complete unconditional love for my family. And I do understand why they think the way they do, and I have no animosity towards it. Occasionally, I do talk to my mother, but it's estranged. But like I said, if nothing else, that was the most incredible gift I could have been given, because it kicked me in the pants as far as what I could do for helping other people, and it actually propelled me to be able to sit in front of people like I did yesterday, perfect strangers who maintain a very private life to the best of their ability, and sit there and lay it all on the table for me. And that is why I felt compelled to actually share this today, because I think it's really important that I don't feel like anybody needs to lose their family. The thing that was stated yesterday was divorce is not an option, and that is something that they wouldn't even consider. But the fact that she even mentioned that tells me how crushing all of this was for them, and the fact that they were able to begin to express it was the most relieving and the very first step to their healing. And I am delighted to have been a part of that process, and I'm excited for them as well. And I trust that they will do right by their older son so that he doesn't grow into having a resentment towards his dad, or his mother for that matter. So that said, as I mentioned, it is a change in the brain structure, and it is possible to modify the symptoms, the way the genes are expressing themselves, the way the symptoms are being manifested. The one thing that I recognized, whether, in high anxiety, autism, schizophrenia, what I recognized is that there's a true anxiety as far as how the world is how they're being perceived, as well as their struggle to communicate. There is opportunities for them to go catatonic, and people misperceive that. They see it as a problem when it could be just their way of self-soothing, kind of getting back to center. I mean, these are terms that we use in many areas of our lives. And this could be just the way they're demonstrating it. And so helping them to be able to communicate is really important for me. Helping people to be able to bridge that gap is really important to me, because I don't think that anybody should be estranged, ostracized, held at arm's length because they're misunderstood. And so part of my work is to share things like this so that people can find a way to begin to communicate. Like I said, I applaud this family that I spoke with yesterday, because they've overcome a lot already and through their own personal communications. This is possible for many, many people when we come from love, when we know that we've made this commitment and we have these commitments, and we can come to them from love. It doesn't have to be ugly. It doesn't have to be painful, but it can be very purposeful. It can be very healing, and very, deliberate. But it doesn't have to coddle and tiptoe around. There's a lot of steps. In the meantime, helping somebody to regulate their neurochemistry. Just imagine, I don't know if you've ever had where you go to sit down and take a test and you just can't think, your mind blanks out, or you've been in a situation where you blank out. Imagine living like that every single day. This is what I see is happening with people who live with an addiction. They get so worked up and so anxious, and by the time they become so dependent on these substances and these behaviors, that it's the only way that they can bring themselves back down. In autism, I see it all the time, because they're trying to struggle. They're struggling to communicate. They're attempting to express themselves, and they're being misunderstood. And so we see them get more and more and more worked up. I see the same thing in schizophrenia. Generalized anxiety. PTSD, the simplest things can get people worked up. My own son struggles with his own form of PTSD, and you can tell, he has this desire to communicate, and he tries so hard to communicate, and when we, meaning his family or friends, try to guess what he's going to say, and so we start speaking over him, and going, oh, well, I understand, I know what you're going to say, and then when we speak, he gets pissed like that, and he will get, and then he gets in a total uproar, and then he gets all worked up, and then you all well, who knows? He has injured himself. He's actually stormed off a deck at one point and disabled himself physically for about 6 months, because he fell off a porch in the middle of the night, 4 feet to the ground. He weighs 200 pounds. He did some damage to his legs. So that said, that was a valuable lesson for him, but I ended up taking care of him. And it was at that point in time that I recognized this type of behavior. And I could see the angst of, like, I just want to tell you something and you're not listening to me, and I can't get it out. His mind is racing faster than his mouth is working. And I see the same thing happen in schizophrenia. I've seen it happen in autism. I've seen it happen in a lot of mental health issues that we consider mental health issues. And if we could, as family and friends, give them the space and help them find a way to relieve that angst, they would be able to better express themselves, and we would be more apt to hear and receive their messages. So it's a learning curve for all of us. And I think the same thing is true for addiction. Addiction is here to teach us a lot of things, and one of the ones is unconditional love. Tough love is another one. Unconditional tough love, because it's painful. It's painful for everyone involved, and my heart is with everyone that's facing anything along these lines. And just know that I'm here to help. I went through this rather quickly. I'm not sure if I missed anything, but I'm always, if this prompted any questions that I didn't cover, please contact me. I'm happy to address it, and I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, have an absolutely beautiful afternoon. Bye now.